Hello everybody, my name is Zeke, welcome to my channel. In today's video, I'm going to be going through the recently published New York Times 100 best books of the century so far. I'm going to go through the list, talk about the books from the list that I have read so far, and kind of give little reviews of them, what I think, if I think they should be on the list, although obviously that's very subjective. And then at the end, I'm actually going to talk about some books from the list that I haven't read but do want to read, and that'll be a separate video in the future where I actually do read those books and give my opinions on them, much like I'm about to do with the books that I've already read. Now, this list has been very divisive. I've seen all across the internet a lot of people trashing it for various reasons, and most of which are valid. I agree with a lot of the critiques. I think the idea that having a list of the 100 best books of this century in the first place is kind of not possible. I really think enjoying books is so subjective. So, I think it's a valiant effort, and I think it's always fun to kind of go through these lists and see what people think and see if I agree. But at the end of the day, it's not that important. It's kind of just something fun to do, for me at least. Personally, I have read 14 out of the 100 books, which I'm pretty proud of, because especially I was going through the first half of the list and I didn't recognize anything. So once we started hitting a few in a row, I was like, okay, I got this. I can consider myself someone who likes books. That is with full sarcasm, because once again, these lists, they don't really mean anything. I'm going to try to do these relatively quickly because there are 14 to get through. But the first book, and I will say what place they were all at in the list. This is Station 11. It was 93 on the list by Emily St. John Mandel. I personally very much love this book. It's kind of a dystopian book. It's set in this world that has gone through a pandemic, and we are following this woman who is part of this traveling acting troupe that goes around and performs Shakespeare at various places, and they don't settle down anywhere. This is their whole lives. They travel around, and we are basically switching between this present reality and the past before, what life was like before, and kind of in the beginning stages of this pandemic. Very, very interesting, very well executed kind of pandemic story. I think especially after COVID, there were a lot of them that came out, and I think this is definitely the best one that I've read. I think the characters are so powerful, and I think the actual plot is the most engaging out of all the ones that I've read, and I think the way the timelines switch back and forth is very well done. I also like that kind of theater element that we get because of the Shakespeare, and I actually want to reread this. I say that all the time about books, and I rarely actually do, but it's been a while at this point, and I really like it. And also, if you end up really enjoying this book, the author has two other books that are kind of set loosely in the same universe, where there's some overlapping characters, and I don't know, there's also a great TV show of this that I would definitely check out, but this I would definitely recommend, and honestly maybe even put higher on the list. I don't know, hot take maybe. Next is Hurricane Season by Fernanda Melchor. I was very, very happy to see this on the list at 82. This book I kind of picked up on a whim last year, at the beginning of last year at this point. Another one I have to reread, obviously. As you can see, kind of slim, but this book packs a big punch. It is a book that starts kind of with a murder, and we work backwards, but also kind of not backwards, to uncover what happened. But that's not really the point. We're basically switching from perspective to perspective in this village where this murder happened, and we're revealing more and more about the characters' lives, the life of the village, and the murder itself. And all the characters are awful, and there's a lot of violence going on. I feel like every single ounce of this book, the atmosphere is just oppressive and very violent. It's brutal. There's disgusting things happening. It's not a fun book to read, but it's definitely beautifully written, I think, is one of the things I always emphasize when I talk about this book. It's not quite stream of consciousness, but it has these long, verbose sentences that really add to that atmosphere. And I think the combination of the atmosphere and all these different perspectives and these characters that we learn about really make this book so incredible. And I would put this really near my top of my list of top 100 books, whatever, because this blew me away, and left me thinking for a while, because once again, very brutal. It was kind of going on in order from like 100 to 1, but I have to do two at once because they actually included two books from the same series, both of which I've read, and that's My Brilliant Friend, which is actually number 1 on their list, and The Story of the Lost Child, which is the 4th book in the same series, and they place this at 80, and these are both by Elena Ferrante in her Neapolitan novels, very popular literary fiction series set in Italy, and we are basically following these two girls from the beginnings of their friendship in childhood all the way through adulthood, kind of set in this framing device of one of the women reflecting in her old age. And there's so much to talk about with this series, but at the core of everything that happens in these books is the complicated relationship between these two women as they grow up, and all of the politics and relationships that surround that. And it's just fascinating. I think, especially after the first book, once you really get into this world and you really start caring about these characters, seeing their successes and their failures just feels so personal and so vivid. And I was completely hooked. I read like the second and third books back to back. Honestly, like, I think the third book's probably my favorite, but they're all pretty amazing, and I just love the series so much. Everyone loves the series so much, but I would definitely recommend at least picking up the first book to basically everyone. And I think, especially for this series, like, I hear about it all the time. I think the hype is like really, really high, and I think it meets it. I think it's really as incredible as everyone says it is, and I'm really, really glad that I've read this. Next at 76 is Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow by Gabrielle Zevin. They placed this at 76. I might have just said that. This is the first one that I'm a little iffy on. I think this is a controversial opinion though. I don't like hate this book. It didn't leave a big impact on me. We're basically following these two people who design video games together, or at a certain point in their lives they did, and their complicated relationship through their like professional lives, but also then their personal lives, and all the people around them in this kind of life that they build with each other and apart from each other. Also, this book, it does span a decent amount of time, so we really get to see the ups and downs in their relationship, and I think that part of the book is very interesting, but overall it didn't leave a big impression on me. And also there's like this one like twist-ish thing that happens that's supposed to be really sad, and for whatever reason it just really didn't hit for me. And so I don't know, I don't really get this one, but a lot of people love it, so I kind of really understand why it's on there. It just wasn't personally for me. Also, I think I did a really bad job at describing this book because I'm not a huge fan of it, so I definitely recommend you look more into it and don't just write it off because it's not my favorite, because once again, a lot of people really love this and I am definitely in the minority there. Okay, next we have Trust by Hernan Diaz at 50. This is another book I kind of picked up on a whim. In this book, we're basically following it's kind of hard to describe because I don't want to reveal too much, but basically we're being told this story in 4 parts in 4 different ways, and different things are getting revealed throughout, so it's kind of a lot going on. And like that structure part of it is very interesting, and what makes this book so unique, by using different like forms of writing and retelling the story so many times, we get all these different perspectives, and it's fascinating and it's really a unique reading experience. However, the actual plot I didn't think was that interesting. We're basically following the life story of this really rich couple. One of the husband's like a financial mogul who's really risen basically to the top of the world, but everything is not as it seems. Big surprise. And so we basically get throughout this book like a fictional account of what happened, and then we get a real account of what happened, and then we get different characters' perspectives on what happened in weird forms that I won't say too much about once again. But I just think the actual like message of the book was kind of clear from the beginning, and I felt like I really knew what was going to end up happening. So when the structure was used to kind of subvert expectations, my expectations kind of already aligned with the subversion. So that didn't really work that well for me, but I still ended up giving it like 4 stars because I really enjoyed how structure was used throughout the book, because I think it is very unique and it does work well. I just wish the story was a little more meaty, for me at least, but definitely understand why it's on here, and definitely a very impressive work of fiction. Next, we have a book that I was very, very excited to see on the list at 49, and that is The Vegetarian by Hong Kang. This book is very unique, to put it lightly. Basically following a woman who one day has a weird dream and wakes up and decides to be vegetarian, and from there we get into this very surreal, almost supernatural experience where we're having her story told to us through 3 different perspectives of people around her, and then I think her herself, if I'm remembering correctly. And it's just it's a story about like how society perceives otherness, but it kind of goes in crazy directions that I think really build upon that theme. And it's a shorter book, so you can kind of read it pretty quickly. And I think for like what it was, it really packed a big punch. And I think that this kind of framing of otherness in the form of this woman who decides to be a vegetarian and how it kind of spirals from there is so well executed, and it feels so real, even though it's obviously there's a lot going on in this book that is kind of crazy. From that kind of simple premise, the way it builds there is really vivid, and I don't know, there's just something about how it's written that really gets beneath, at least it got beneath my skin, and it creeped me out a little bit, and I really enjoyed it. And I think that it's not necessarily a horror book, I really don't think it is, but it's definitely unsettling, and I really enjoyed it, and I would definitely recommend it, so I'm very glad it was on this list. At 46, we have The Goldfinch by Donna Tartt. I've read all three of Donna Tartt's books at this point, and she's very hit or miss for me. This book was somewhere in the middle. I've read Secret History, which I absolutely loved, this, which I thought was good, and then her other book, The Little Friend, which I absolutely did not like at all. This book, though, won like the Pulitzer Prize, so what do I know? In the book, we follow the life of this boy as he grows up after this accident that completely upends his life, and the story kind of evolves from there. He moves around, he has to struggle through his childhood. There's a lot of traumatic stuff that happens there. As he grows up, he becomes more and more enthralled by an object, a painting that was very central to the accident that happened to him as a child, and he gets involved in some pretty shady things because of that. And there's a lot more going on. It's like a 600-page plus book, but that's the general gist of the story. I think that this character is very well realized. I think that there are parts of the book, especially in his childhood, that are very, very engaging, and also really capture this portrait she's trying to paint of this boy's life. Especially in his childhood, we see her kind of tackle the ideas of survival, identity, loss very well. And I think she really tries to continue that through to his adulthood. But I think as the story goes on, for me, I just don't really care for the direction it goes. But a lot of people really love this book, so once again, don't listen to me. But I would definitely recommend The Secret History over this. They couldn't put it on the list because it was published in the 90s, I get it. But I also understand why this is on here, because a lot of people love it, and I just think it was good. I'm not like mad about this, because I definitely still enjoyed the book. I just think that she has better books, so, but they couldn't include it, so it's fine. Next, we have one of the few like genre fiction inclusions here, and that's The Fifth Season by N.K. Jemisin at 44. I absolutely love this series. This is the first book in a series. I still think about it. I read it, I gotta say, like 3-4 years ago at this point. Another thing I really have to reread, but absolutely breathtaking. In this first book, we're following 3 perspectives, and they're basically living in this world where the world basically ends every once in a while in these fifth seasons that basically are like catastrophic world-ending natural disasters. And we're following like a mother, and then someone who is kind of younger but still in adulthood, and then a child, as they navigate this world in different ways and different environments. And once again, I'm saying this for so many books, but I don't want to like give away too much. Basically, in this book, at the start of the book, there's an event in the mother's life relating to her children that basically shocks her into action, and she has to go on a journey and blah, 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 blah. But there's a lot more to this book. The world definitely expands as the series goes on. Especially in this first book, there's one of the perspectives is written in second person, so very inventive, and also the way that magic works in this world really relates to all the world building and this idea of seasons in a way that I thought that I really enjoy. I really like it when I'm reading a story where the magic is related to the world at large. So I was very, very happy to see this, and it reminded me again that I really have to reread this series. But I would definitely be wary going into this. I don't think it's for everyone because second person, weird stuff going on, but absolutely phenomenal. Probably one of my favorite fantasy sci-fi series of all time. Next at 41 was Small Things Like These by Claire Keegan. I don't want to talk too much about this because it's not my favorite, but short book, basically following this man who lives in Ireland and the evils of the church. And I'll leave it at that because short book, want to leave it vague, and not a lot actually happens in the book. Was not my favorite, which is, everyone loves this book, so don't attack me, but absolutely tackles an important topic about abuse, and I thought that the way it handled that was very well done, and that's all I'll say. At 39 was A Visit from the Goon Squad by Jennifer Egan. I have to be so honest, I barely remember reading this book. My one vivid memory is that there is a portion of this book that is told entirely in PowerPoint form, which is quite a jarring experience, but definitely memorable. Other than that, I remember like this follows like people who are involved in the music industry, and specifically like a small group of people and their relationships with each other over time, as they kind of got older and got more involved in different things. I do remember really liking about this book is that it's not huge, it's pretty short, but it's able to tell a very complex narrative that really weaves all these characters' lives together in a really compelling way. And so I think that if you're looking for like something that feels like really grandiose and has all these nuanced character relationships, but you don't want to read like a tome, this is really good for you. But also there are like quirky things in here like the PowerPoint that I was talking about, so be aware of that going in. Maybe I should reread this because, as I said, really don't remember a lot of the actual plot, what's going on, but I do remember like enjoying getting to learn about these characters over time and how their relationships were shaped over time. Also, one more thing I forgot to mention, we kind of learn about the paths of these two main characters, at least in parallel, but they don't necessarily like learn about each other. So getting that kind of outside perspective is another really compelling part of the book that I think is important to mention, because I think getting to see that and knowing that the characters don't know exactly what's going on makes you feel kind of involved, and that's definitely a part of the book that has stuck with me and made me enjoy it. Okay, 4 more, speed round. Next at 15, we have Pachinko by Jin Lee. This is a sweeping, as you can see, book about this Korean family told through multiple timelines throughout generations, spanning different continents, countries. This book starts relatively small and it really branches out from there, and getting to see the lives of these different generations, the parallels between them, is the real powerful part of this book. And like seeing where we start versus where we end up is kind of crazy, especially when you're at by the end of the book. It's like, how do we even get here? But definitely really love it. Think that it does this like grand sweeping tale very well. Think the character, even though it is like grand and told across generations, the characters are still very well fleshed out, which was very important to me. And this is definitely a very well loved book, so I'm really glad to see it on this list. I was so glad Joan Didion's Year of Magical Thinking was here at number 12. This is a book where Joan Didion, my favorite author, talks about the death of her husband. At the same time, her daughter was very sick, and so kind of these two concurrent instances of grief and possibility for loss were things she had to deal with them concurrently. It was a lot for her to handle, and she reflects on that grief, she reflects on the loss, and her kind of life with her husband and with her family all throughout this book, and it's beautiful. I don't know how she wrote something like this in such grief. Obviously, it came out a few years after he died, but still. And I think that there's nothing quite like it, or at least I haven't read anything quite like it. But obviously, there's a lot going on, so not a really happy read, but definitely an important one. Okay, last book on this list was Never Let Me Go by Kazuo Ishiguro at number 9. This book I read when I was very, very sick, almost in a fever dream, and I think that really suits the book. We kind of start in these vague circumstances. We don't know a lot of what's going on, and I think that's important going into the book, so I won't say too much, but we're following a few kids who are at this mysterious boarding school where all is not as it seems, and it's a dystopian book. We learn a lot more as the book goes on, and I like it, and I don't absolutely love it. This is obviously ranked really, really high, so they seem to think that this is one of the best books maybe ever. I enjoyed it. I thought the story was well done. I thought that the themes it tries to tackle through this dystopian narrative were done very well. I don't want to go into what those themes are because it's kind of a spoiler, but yeah, I liked it. Maybe I would like it more if I hadn't read it in a fever dream where I don't know how much was real and how much was part of that fevered state that I was in. But I'm definitely very glad I read this, and this was kind of one of my first exposures to more literary fiction, so it definitely got me into the genre, even though this is still very dystopian and kind of not really what I read now when I think of the literary fiction I read. So important book for me, especially because the time I was reading it is very memorable, and very not surprised to see it on this list because it's often lauded as an amazing book. So those are all the books I've read on the list. Once again, I'm happy I've read that many, but now going into some of the books that I'm planning on reading that are on the list that I haven't read yet. So what did surprise me was most of the books on the list that I hadn't read, they weren't things I'd even heard of. So I got to go through all of them and look at the ones that seemed interesting. And then after I did that, I narrowed it down to 3 that I could get easily from the library. The first one is 10th of December, which was 54 on the list by George Saunders. My understanding is this is a short story collection that has weird stories, but it's a little old. It's not old, obviously, it's in the century, but I think early 2000s, mid 2000s, so kind of older than most of the short story collections I read now. So kind of excited to see that. Don't know much about it beyond that. Next at 28 was Cloud Atlas by David Mitchell. This seems like it's going to be a journey. I think it's very, very long, and we're following a bunch of different narratives that kind of get flipped between, or we only get like this one for a little bit and then another one for a little bit and then another one, something like that. But it seems like there's going to be a lot going on. It seems like it's going to be very cleverly interwoven, and I'm excited for that, but definitely going to be an endeavor. Next at 28 and last at 28, not 28, 21, was Evicted by Matthew Desmond. This is a nonfiction book. Very happy because I've been trying to read more nonfiction and failing to read more nonfiction, but now I'll finally have incentive. This is kind of a reporting almost. The author followed 8 families that were struggling to keep a roof over their heads, and I'm sure he'll interweave that with like statistics and facts and blah, 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 and tell an interesting story that I'm sure will be absolutely devastating and awful, and will tell me a lot about how fucked everything is, but very excited for that and excited to read all 3 of these. So I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. Also, let me know kind of, are there books from this list that you've read that you want to read, that you've really enjoyed, that you've not enjoyed so much, that you're curious to learn more about? And I will see you in the next one.